Hello and welcome to another edition of Empathy at the Table. I'm with Mike Phillips. Mike is the founder and head of Phillips Consulting, a niche management consulting firm specializing in commercial negotiations for public and private sector companies. For almost 30 years, he's led negotiations for organizations such as diverse as the National Health Service in the UK, local councils, global manufacturing corporations. He's negotiated contracts for everything from nursing home placements to cinema screens, orthopedic implants to sewage pumps, liquid helium to truck leases. With clients in the UK, Europe, US, and Asia, Michael is he's traveled the world and he's spent decades negotiating and practicing. So he's the real deal, folks. And I'm really glad to invite Mike Phillips onto Empathy at the Table. And let's chop up what negotiation really means. Mike, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Tony. Yeah, it's great to be here.
Thank you. So let's jump straight into the diving pool. For the listeners who maybe haven't heard about you, and I'm always interested in people's trajectory into the world of negotiation, because we're not really born saying, "Yeah, I want to be a negotiator for a living." And as far as I remember, there was no career path in school for being negotiation kind of trainer. So I'd like to know, what's your trajectory into this world of negotiation?
Well, I started life in engineering, actually. That was my degree in mechanical engineering. And then I moved into manufacturing management, so typically being a production manager or a manufacturing manager for manufacturing corporations. And then, like a lot of people, I accidentally ended up in procurement or responsible for procurement. And so that's where I started getting involved in generally negotiating contracts with suppliers. And then I had sort of an itch to start my own business. So 30 years ago now, I became freelance and started a small consulting business. So helping, as you said in the intro, different types of corporations, public and private, negotiate with their suppliers. And so that's 30 years. So initially it was just sort of jumping in, learning on the job. And then obviously over decades, you refine and refine and refine and become a bit of a student of negotiating. And so that's really where I am now. That's my core expertise. That's where people, ask me to help them when they need negotiating expertise.
Yeah, a couple of good things that I like already that you've said about this idea of evolving and being a student. Because I looked at your LinkedIn profile, and typically when I'm researching, I see different industries people have been in, different jobs they've had. Now, you've been in the game for 30 years, the same company doing the same thing. So I mean, kudos to you. No one can say that you haven't put in the graveyard shift. Would you? I mean, when you look back at how the world of negotiation was looked at when you first started 30 years ago to the way we look at negotiation today, what would you see are the main differences, if there are any at all?
Well, I guess that's a good question. I think, in business, negotiating has always been seen to be an important skill. From the area where I came from, procurement, there's been a lot of debate about where procurement sits in the business and what it's there for. I've always tended to be a little bit resistant to sort of looking at procurement as a specialism, because I feel really when we're talking about procurement and we're talking about negotiating, it's a sort of business wide thing. And I think to be a great negotiator, you need to in business anyway, you need to understand the whole business scheme and not really be a specialist in sales, in procurement, in whatever. So it's really a generalist view that you need of the organization, because that's really, because when you've got someone across the table, you've got to understand from their perspective. So, for example, if you're in procurement, it's no good being a procurement nerd. You've really got to understand what it's like to be on the sales side as well, because you've got to understand that person across the table and understand what you need to do to get them to do what you need to do, and you're not going to do that if you don't understand their position.
Yeah.
So to answer your question, has it changed much in 30 years? I'm not sure it has changed terribly, Tony, because I think at the end of the day, negotiating is about human interactions, and and that's almost eternal, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think the key thing, as ever, is that you've got to try and understand the other side. You've got to do your homework, and that probably was the same 30 years ago as it is today, to be honest.
What about the pressure that comes from your other stakeholders within in the value chain? Because I think sometimes I often hear a lot with procurement that they're given a mandate, and the mandate is to save costs, but they have competing priorities within the company, right? Because maybe sales, they don't care about saving costs, or marketing, maybe finance, yes. So when you have these competing priorities and you're given specific mandates, how do you think that a procurement specialist handle that initial negotiation, which is with their stakeholders, before they go out and actually speak to the customer?
Well, I think this comes back to my feeling that we don't want to look at procurement as too specialist, because at the end of the day, when I'm working for a business client, I'm generally engaged at board level by the managing director or possibly the operations director, and we're really looking at the overall health of the business. Now, that inevitably does, particularly in manufacturing corporations, as you can imagine, a lot of the whole revenue of the business actually gets spent in buying in parts and components to make the product. So that's probably the single biggest expenditure. And if we can't get that right, then the business is not going to survive. So I think we need to be able to focus in on that, and success in business is about the bottom line at the end of the day. It has to be sustainable. So if we're thinking about negotiating, when I'm negotiating, I am driving a hard bargain, but I'm making sure that I'm doing a deal that I know is going to be sustainable. It's no good me twisting a supplier's arm around their back and getting what I want, and then in 12 months' time they go bust. That's not going to work. So it has to be sustainable. And the other thing that I always want to emphasize is, in terms of what we're arguing about, it's governed by the market. So what is the market price? If you're 20% above the market price, if you're like, that's not my problem, you're 20% above the market price, you need to address that. Why is that? And I suppose another thing that follows on from that is that, in terms of what I'm demanding in the negotiating, I'm only using real data. I'm not going to bluff, because that's, at the end of the day, that's not going to get us anywhere. So I do my homework. What is the market price for the product or service we're buying? Is the person across the table, at the market price or not? Now, when you've done your homework and you've really exploited the market, often the person across the table, there is some room. That's why we're negotiating.
Yeah.
But I'm not just making a number up. I'm not just if the market price is £100 or $100, that's the price we're going to be talking about. So it's about using the market, and being authentic, and being reasonable in the negotiating. But assertive is important.
There's a real rumble going on in the negotiation community about this word trust. Some people can't stand the word trust and say trust has got nothing to do with it. If you've got a great product, great service, that should sell itself. And if it doesn't work with this customer, then go to another customer, because your product will speak for itself. And there's others that say, well, it's all about trust. And I know some experts have actually put a dollar value on what trust is. When you actually negotiate, and there's been some research that's been done to show that when there's less trust, there is an actual dollar value attached to that, and that's money being left on the table. Where do you shake out on the value of trust in a negotiation?
Well, I would say I think trust is important. I think trust on a sort of personable level. I think if we can't trust each other in as much as saying, oh, I'll give you the order, but I'm not giving you a PO. You can trust
Right.
me. Not at that level.
Right.
But on a personal level, you've got to feel that the person on the other side is. The word is trustworthy, I guess, but it's that you've got a connection with them. They're listening to you. That's important. They're listening to what you're saying, and you're listening to what they're saying. So on a personal level, I think you do need a degree of trust. If you give the impression that you're being slippery or you're not telling the truth,
Yeah.
then trust breaks down, and then that's when money is left on the table because the person on the other side holds back. They don't give everything because they have to have something in the bag because they can't trust you. So I do think trust is really important, but not to the level of being naive, if you know what I
Yeah.
mean.
Yeah. I definitely agree with you. I think it's fundamental. There are certain inherent assumptions of trust that you make, right, when you're across the table with someone. And if that fundamental bond is broken, then even if the product is the best product, even if it's the best service, just because you don't trust the other person, that can hamper the deal. So I agree with you there. Listen, I like the way you wrote on your, I think, LinkedIn profile, or I saw it somewhere when I was researching you, and you went negotiation for nerds and novices.
Mm-hmm.
And that was when I heard that, I thought, no, that I really like that. I'd like to expand on that when you mean, like, because I'm a nerd, I love this stuff, but I also want this podcast to be for novices, right? For people who think they don't negotiate, because we all do, right? We all do. So tell me about your approach and how you deal with nerds versus novices when you teaching negotiation.
Well, yeah, I mean, Tony, I'm a nerd as well. I love negotiating, and I've been doing it for 30 years. I'm in my early 60s now, and I still love doing it, and I've got no intention to stop doing it. So I love it too. I think it is something that a novice can pick up. There's a little bit of natural ability, I've got to say, but all of us have got a certain degree of emotional intelligence, and I suppose that for each of us, there's going to be a ceiling to what we can achieve. But what I want to encourage people when I'm training them is them to maximise out their emotional intelligence, and that's what's really important in negotiating. So I think. If you've got a bit of natural ability, then you're going, then that's all the better. But I think, what are the sort of natural abilities that we're talking about? It's to be able to be engaged with people. It's to be a little bit courageous, to be able to step
Yeah.
out of your comfort zone, and also it's to be a little bit assertive. Say very clearly what you want. So many times when I'm coaching people, I'm seeing they're beating around the bush, and I need to encourage that you've got to speak directly. Say what it is you want and why you want it. Don't beat around the bush. Don't have a British reserve and
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
embarrassed about it.
Yeah.
So I think it is something that a novice can pick up quite quickly, and certainly they can learn a lot, I think, because there are little things. For example, I'm always encouraging people to use courtesy, to warmly shake a hand when you meet, look in the eye, use the other person's name, because courtesy is a concession that you can offer that costs nothing. Doesn't you're not there's no financial cost to that other than just thinking about being personable to the other side. And that brings us back to this trust issue, which we've said is important, is that you're building up a rapport with the other side, and that's something that sometimes novice people assume, that you've got to be this bruiser and you've got to be this cool, aloof person. It's actually the opposite. You've got to be friendly and personable to the other person on the issues. That's where
Yeah.
you can be more hardball. But on all
Yeah.
those free things like courtesy and good manners, well, lay that on as thickly as you like. I think
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
more the better.
Yeah. Yeah. Being authentic, as
Yeah.
long as it's authentic.
Yeah, of course.
I
Yeah, yeah.
think that goes without saying. So I love your book,
Thank
the
you.
Naked Negotiator. Okay, before we dive in, and I've loads of questions about the book, but I just want you to tell our listeners, why is the book called The Naked Negotiator?
Well, so I mean, I was obviously had this idea for a book, and I wanted to have a catchy title for it. And what I kind of realized over, you mentioned in the intro about how I've negotiated for all sorts of different things, an absolute bizarre array of things I've been involved in negotiating. But basically, what I have noticed over the years is that essentially there's every negotiation is the same in one respect, in as much it's an interaction between people. There's a human interaction going on, and that's that. So there's common themes on that. So if you take any negotiation, whatever it is, there will be specifics that are relevant to that specific negotiation. But once you strip them away, you're left with the core about the core negotiation theory, and that's, if you like, the naked negotiation. All the specifics stripped away, what is it that's left that makes the negotiation work or not work.
And for the listeners, I really strongly recommend you get this book, because it is written for all people who negotiate, and it's the thing that most of us, when we talk about negotiating, it's the thing that most of us either have had to negotiate or will have to negotiate, and that's a salary, that's a pay rise. And I like the way you tell a beautiful story with Ellen, and how she goes in and she meets the naked negotiator, and he's full of courtesy, a really nice guy, and there's some really juicy morsels in there that you kind of drop along there, and I want to pick up on the first one that came to me was, you talk about Ellen being prepared for her negotiations, and how important it is to actually prep for negotiations. A lot of people ask me about that, about preparing for negotiation. How do you do it? How do you prepare? What if somebody asked you, how would you actually prepare for a negotiation? What are maybe let's say the top 3 most important steps that somebody needs to take and let's talk specifically for a salary negotiation?
Yeah, I mean, I should just say in passing, is that the book uses salary negotiation as a case study, but of course the lessons in it apply to any negotiation. But yeah, thinking about a salary. So first of all, we touched on a little bit earlier, it's the market. So what is the market price for your job? The job that you want a salary increase. Well, why? So you need to do your homework, find out what is a reasonable market price for the job that you're doing. So that's absolutely critical. You have to have some justification for demanding an increase. It can't just be because, I need more money. That's not how business works. At the end of the day, this is a business transaction. I will do work for you. You recompense me with a salary. So you have to find out what the market price is. I think the other thing is to kind of understand who it is that you're negotiating with. Think about what type of person the other person is, the manager who you may be negotiating with. Are they sort of a people person, a number person? Are they sort of a strict, business logic person? So just give some thought to what type of person they are, and make sure you, if you like, speak their language when you discuss it with them. Because if you're not speaking their language, you're not going to connect with them. So understand the person who's the other side. And I suppose the other thing that in the specific context of salary negotiation is probably understand the organisation that you're with, and whether it's going to be feasible for them to give you what you need. Because if they can't, if they're on the verge of going broke, then maybe your best option is to try and find someone else to work for, to be honest. So do your homework, understand the market, understand who you're negotiating with, and understand the organisation that you're negotiating in.
Yeah, that's sage advice. So I had a situation where, and I'd love to hear your take on this. So I'd offered somebody a job, and I'd given them, we discussed salary, and I said, look, here's the salary, and I offered them a job, and they said, yep, great. They were really happy to take the job. And then a day or so later, I got an email back saying, look, the answer is yes, I definitely want the job, but I'm just not happy with the conditions. but I'm sure we can work this out. So can we talk more about maybe, the salary? And I love negotiating, and I like people who negotiate. I think it's important. But I had given my best offer. And I remember when I received that as an email, it almost felt like, that tactic you use when you've got them and they're ready to buy, and then you say, oh, by the way, and you give them another. It felt a bit underhanded, and it was all written by ChatGPT as well. And it kind of just felt to me that they'd been following a script by ChatGPT, and it said, right, now that you've got the job and they've offered it to you, now's the time to go in and negotiate and see if you can squeeze to get a higher salary. And I felt that was a bit manipulative. And even though the person was a great person, I actually I retracted my offer based on that reason. How would you feel about that? What's your advice on that? Do you think this person made the right decision to negotiate at that moment, or?
No,
Yeah.
I don't. I sympathise with your feeling here,
Right.
because I think the time to negotiate would have been before the deal was finally sealed.
Right.
So when it became clear that you wanted to offer the job, then that would have been the time, I feel, to say, let's talk about the salary. Well, obviously you had that because it appeared that there was an agreement on
Right.
salary there. But I think once the deal's done, then it doesn't feel very right. And if ChatGPT did advise that person to do that, I think that's bad advice.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
your natural reaction was to be, a bit wound up by it. And
Yeah.
I think that's a natural reaction. That
Yeah.
you understood the deal was done. And then afterwards, after the fact, then there's an attempt to move the goalposts. And I think I would have been exactly the same as you, without a doubt.
Yeah. And also, this is another thing that comes up a lot when it comes to salary negotiations. What's your advice when it comes to negotiating for a job already done versus negotiating for what I'm going to do in the future?
Well, I think if you're in a job and you feel you're underpaid, I think it comes back to what I've said earlier. You've got to justify why you feel you're underpaid. So that's you're doing your homework in terms of markets salaries, and there's lots of places on the web now that you can research salary levels. I think if you're negotiating a new job, then I think probably it's probably still a good idea to know what's a reasonable salary. But I think you've got more opportunity there. I think you've got to try and sense about how much the other party really wants you.
Yeah.
And I think this is important. I think I would strongly say put what you want on the table first.
Yeah,
Don't wait for the offer. Yeah. So and in terms of putting what you want on the table, be ambitious. So but credible. So, so put at the highest salary you dare, but not a silly salary, if you see what I mean. So again, you've done your homework. Let's say the midpoint is the top end maybe is 80,000 a year. Go as near to that as you like, but don't go 120 if you know that's not really a realistic thing. But get your offer in first, and be bold, but be credible.
Yeah. I think it's also, as an employer myself, it's important when I'm it's all about value, right? It's about value exchange. So if you can demonstrate to me clearly the value you bring, then the negotiation is then around, okay, what's the dollar amount we attach to that value that you bring? Right? It's first we have to agree that what you think is of value to me is of value to me and to the company. That's the first negotiation. And once we agree that, that's absolutely, the value, and you're the person to deliver that value, then the next logical conversation is, so what's the, how important is that to you, right? What's the actual amount of money that you're prepared to pay for that? And then I also think it's important to put milestones in place. Okay, so once we've agreed, then there are certain levels of milestones that are in place along the way to ensure that we're checking in with each other and we are achieving, what you have promised and what I've promised along the way. I think that's, for me, when I negotiate salaries with my employees, that's how I like. I agree, do the homework, do all that stuff, then come with prepared to advocate for yourself, but advocate in a way that's not unrealistic, right? So, and not asking me to almost back pay you, right? Oh, I've done all this, I've done this, and now I need to be paid. I remember somebody once saying it was like buying a car, driving it for a bit, and then the car showroom coming up and saying, well, can you pay me more for that car that you've just bought? It doesn't make sense. You know, you need to be kind of building in that's my view anyway. What do you think?
Well, I think that's true, and I think when you're first agreeing a salary,
Yeah.
you need to have done your homework then,
Yeah.
whichever side of the table you're on, so you know that what's reasonable. I mean, I think thinking back to the years ago, it was a long time ago when I was an employee. I suppose there is an element thinking aloud now where you want the job and so you get it, and then you're in the job for a while, I guess, and you think I'm delivering, but that's the key thing. I'm delivering, I'm
Right.
delivering, I'm delivering.
Right.
Then I think maybe you could go back and start and talk about a salary increase, but you have to deliver. And this
Yeah.
comes back to your point about value. And I think if you are delivering, I think most employers would be more relaxed about
Absolutely.
that sort of discussion. Don't do it if you're not delivering.
Right.
Why the hell should you get an increase if you're not delivering?
Yeah. 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 You talk about the power of anchors in the book as
Yeah.
well. Maybe for people who don't know what an anchor is, who aren't nerds like us, maybe explain what an anchor is. And then I'd like to, the follow-up question to that is, do you think that there's a possibility of people seeing use of anchors as maybe slightly manipulative sometimes?
Well, that's a good question, and in the book there's a really great illustration of how anchoring works, and it is drawn from a very solid academic study about how this works. And so an anchor really is about. So this is where I advocate for saying make the first offer in a negotiation, and it's interesting in the negotiating world because there's a bit of a dichotomy on this. Some
Yeah.
people don't agree, but I would say all the academic research backs this up, that you make the first offer where you can. Sometimes circumstances don't allow that, but the idea behind it is that you're putting a number in the person's head. If you say, I want 80k, that number has gone into their head whether they like it or not. That's the way we are as human beings, and so that's why you jump in, you make the first offer, and as long as it's credible, as long as it's not
Yeah.
silly. If it's completely silly, that just gets emotionally dismissed. But if so it can be ambitious but credible, and then now that's where the discussion is happening around that number that you've planted. If you wait for the other party to make the first offer, they may offer at the other end, and now you're talking down at that end. I mean, on a simple level, it's a little bit like you go in a shop and it says £10 was £25. You think, oh, I've got a real good
Right.
discount
Right.
there because you were anchored by the 25, and when really, it might be available at £5 around the corner.
And so the application of that knowledge could be perceived as manipulative.
Yeah, on your manipulative question, I think that's a good one. And again, I do address this in the book because I don't think it's manipulative at all. I just think it's naturally the way that we work, and the item on offer in the shop is a great example of that. Another one, you think about if you're, I don't know, if you're selling your car, and you'll accept 10,000, but you generally put it up for 12,000,
Yeah.
but and if a buyer comes along, if they say, oh, what will you accept? The correct answer is 12,000. No, you
Right.
don't just go,
Right.
oh, 10,000, because you've just given away 2 grand without needing to. So I think it is about negotiating. It's about what you will accept and what I will accept. And I think the reality of anchoring, I guess we know it's human nature to be anchored in this way once a number is planted there, and it's about being a student of psychology and using that to your benefit. Again, I and the Naked Negotiator would never advocate dishonesty, because that's not only morally wrong, but it also, you can get found out, and once you get found out, you've lost all trust, and that's the end of the negotiation. So don't be dishonest, but you know, human nature is human nature. Use that to your advantage.
Mike, as I'm listening to you talk, I can imagine being one of your customers, and I can imagine you walking in and you just embody this just confidence. You know what you're talking about. You're not trying to prove anything. But in the back of it, there's this sense that I'm going to be all right with Mike. I just get this sense that I'll be all right. And if it doesn't work out, we're going to keep pushing until it does work out. And so the question that comes to my head is, how have you stayed motivated and as passionate as you have been for the last 30 years doing what you do?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I do love doing it. I mean, I think I like helping my clients. And I think whenever we achieve something, we're helping the stability and the longevity of the client. As I've got older, increasingly I'm enjoying working with younger people as well. And that keeps you young, working with younger people. So that's good as well. And I think, we're talking about negotiating. I think if you've got people who are open to learning, then there is a lot to learn. It's a skill that can be acquired. I think most people at some level can gain competence in it, and then it spreads out through all sorts of areas in your life. I mean, even on a personal level with those you love, it's teaching you to try and understand the other party a bit better, and so it can have all sorts of benefits in life, as well as financial benefits in terms of when you've got to, I don't know, buy a car or something.
Yeah. Are you one of those people that when you go you book a hotel and you try and negotiate the best deal on a hotel, you go into a market in Marrakesh, you're trying to negotiate the best deal. Are you always negotiating, or do you ever switch it off?
Well, I think the funny thing is, my wife always says, you spend all your life negotiating for other people, but you're rubbish negotiating on your own. Because I guess maybe it feels like a busman's holiday. I can't be bothered. I mean, I think in terms of buying houses over the time that, whenever I've been involved in buying a house, and that's potentially a big negotiation. If it's a house I'm buying, to live in, then generally I'm not a big negotiator because there's very much an emotional attachment. So you go to the house and you think, I love this house.
Yes,
we want this house, and I don't want to be. Let's just offer what they want. Let's get the deal done. So I don't like to muck about with things like that. But when I'm in a business scenario, that's a different matter, and that's where that's fun. But I'm not at home. I'm not a terribly good negotiator, mainly because maybe it's a busman's holiday, as I say.
Listen, you make a good point actually, because there's this. People think that, right, you're a negotiating coach or negotiation expert, whatever you want to call it. So people think, oh, right, you must always be good at negotiating. You must get the best deals all the time. And I think part of this, we've mentioned the term emotional intelligence. The part of the emotional intelligence is to recognize that certain situations, just internally, there's a sense inside you that I'm not the right person for this, right? I'm not in the right state emotionally for whatever reason. As you said, I'm emotionally attached to the outcome. So maybe I need to recuse myself from this particular process and put somebody who's better at this process than me, because I recognize that even though I have the skill set, emotionally I'm too involved, and so therefore I recuse myself from the process. And I think that's something that you need to overcome your ego to be able to say that, and walk away from a situation and have somebody who's in a better position to do that negotiation. Yeah,
Tony, I think this emotional point is really important, because I think negotiating needs to be put it this way: if you let emotion get involved in it, then you're not really thinking logically. If you get emotionally involved, and so as ever, so I've obviously over the many years locked horns with all sorts of other people on negotiations, and I'm always very calm. I don't get emotionally involved, even if there's a personal attack on me. it just washes over me. I'm only interested in the issues. But there's one person who can get me emotionally involved. It's my wife, So because I'm emotionally connected to her,
Yeah.
If she doesn't do it often, but if she
Yeah.
launches a personal attack, it
Yeah.
hurts. Where
Yeah.
if somebody in a business situation, if it's a personal attack, then it really doesn't make any difference. So I do think you're right. Emotional involvement, and that comes back to what I was alluding to when you're buying a house. If it's the house you want to live in, you are emotionally involved in it, and I just want to get the deal done. I'm not
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
interested in squeezing out the last £1,000.
Yeah.
But coming back to sort of the negotiation piece, if you find yourself getting emotionally involved or angry or whatever, it's best, as you say, either to recuse yourself or to let's have a break. Let's have a
Yeah.
break
Yeah.
and come back to it later.
Yeah.
Definitely, yeah.
Excellent. Yeah. Yeah. Under what circumstances, if any, have you said no to working with a client? What have you ever said no to working with a client? And if so, under what circumstances were they?
Well, I think, to be honest, I tend to follow Richard Branson's law on this, and he would say, if an opportunity comes along, say yes and then work out how to do it. So I can't really think of many instances where I've said no. I mean, there have been occasions where we haven't been able to agree terms. Nobody wants to be a busy fool, I think.
Yeah.
This
Yeah.
comes back to what you were saying earlier about valuing. I've got an idea of what value I can bring, and if the other party doesn't agree that I can bring that value, then we might not proceed. But generally, from a business perspective, I say, yeah, if an opportunity comes along, grab it and then work
Yeah.
out how to do
Yeah.
it.
Well, Mike, it's we're coming to the end of our conversation, and I always kind of have a tinge of regret when I get to this stage, because I know I could go on and on and on, and but for our listeners, I try and keep it around 30 minutes, 35 minutes. So I'd like to ask you the question for many listeners who are probably wondering, how do I get hold of this guy and go deeper? And after 30 years, what's exciting you now? What's the next thing, the next new thing for you?
Well, in terms of getting hold of me, you can look me up on LinkedIn. I'm also on X as well. My moniker there is Negotiation Guru, all one word. You can find me there. What's really exciting me? Well, I'm still busy working with at the moment commercial companies, helping them, supporting their teams. I am very excited about this book that I've written. I'm very pleased with it. I mean, generally when I come on a podcast like this, I reread it just to get it fresh in my mind. And I'll be honest, I read it and I think I'm really happy with that. So I want as many people as possible to be able to see this book. I know probably all authors say this, but everybody who's read it say they love it. And so I want to, over those 30 years of working, this very easy to read book has distilled down that expertise, and the more people I can share that with, then the happier I'll be.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I think it's a great read. You'll read it in a couple of days. I've given it to my kids. They're 15 years old, and I've got triplets, three 15-year-olds. So I've given it to them to read, and they love the story. And in fact, so my last question, actually, which I'm going to sneak in here, because one of them asked me to ask you this: are you the Naked Negotiator in the book? Is it based on your personality?
It's a bit of a mix.
Right.
It is a bit of me as well,
Right.
but it's also a bit of my father-in-law, who was a sort of had a slightly nutty professor thing about him. So there's a kind of mix of him and my father-in-law, a slightly eccentric, but very sort of personable character. Yeah.
Brilliant. Mike, you bring a beautifully fresh perspective to the world of negotiation. You make it relevant, and I think the idea is of this whole podcast and the work I do is I want to democratize negotiation. I don't want people to be afraid of negotiation and just think it's something that other people do. I think it's something that embraces everyone. And your book is a perfect example of that. So I'd like to thank you for the work you do. You'll find all the links to Mike in the show notes. Thank you for joining us today on Empathy at the Table.
Thank you, Tony. Great speaking with you.